head. Don't believe in what I say, believe yourself instead. Listen to that silent voice that speaks inside your head. Don't believe in what I say, believe yourself instead. Listen to that silent voice that speaks inside your head. Don't believe in what I say, believe yourself instead. Listen to that silent voice that speaks inside your head. Don't believe in what I say, believe yourself instead. Listen to that silent voice that speaks inside your head. Don't believe in what I say, believe yourself instead. Listen to that silent voice that speaks inside your head. Don't believe in what I say, believe yourself instead. Listen to that silent voice that speaks inside your head. So many scholars argue, the whole ship disagree. Wise men and pagans, some should fly free. So many scholars argue, the whole ship disagree. Wise men and pagans, some should fly free. And if you've got to ask me if you're right or wrong, then you've got to listen harder to your soul by song, to your soul by song.
What got you into the Celtic Cross?
I was brought up in the west of Scotland as a child, so I was always interested in nature and I was always questioning. I always remember at primary school one of the questions that a teacher posed to me. I posed to a teacher was that I really wanted to know when the Ice Age ended. And at that time, which was in the early 50s, I was told 40 million years. It makes sense to me because there were shells and things in my garden that I noticed. And so I really set about trying to find out the answers for things for myself. I guess came to the cross conclusion after 40 odd years of looking. What surprised me about it was that I was brought up in the west of Scotland, which is full of Celtic crosses and wheel crosses, and I, like every other human being, walked past them and just saw them as part of the background.
Yeah.
And what, a gravestone marker, something you see in the church. Never thought about the meaning, and it's only later in life that I realised that nobody ever makes anything that doesn't have meaning. And so therefore you should look at the meaning of every image you ever see.
Yeah. So, just from a standard historical point of view, what is the Celtic Cross to the rest of the world?
It's a religious icon. There's a huge history about where it came from.
Yeah.
It became absorbed in religion. I think it probably became absorbed in religion by Constantine. The Emperor Constantine was at war at the time with 5 other Caesars. But Constantine's very interesting because Constantine was a Gaul, and the Gallic people, or the Gallic people if you like, really were spread from France, North Spain, Portugal, Cornwall, the United Kingdom, all the peripheral coastal areas up to Scotland, including Ireland. Now of course I found out they travelled much further than that. But the interesting thing about him coming from Gaul was that it was around the time of Christ that Caesar was busily chopping the Gauls apart in northern Europe. And I think they had, I can't remember, 10,000 troops or something. I think the French Asterix, the Gaul, is a reflection of those days.
Right.
But one of the symbols of the Gallic people, if you like, was the wheel cross, or Odin's wheel.
Right.
And what's known now as the Chi Rho cross was raised by Constantine as a replacement, if you like, for the Christian sign of the fish. Right. Now, interestingly enough, the sign of the fish, which is still the Pope's hat, the sign of born again Christians on the back of the cars, and so the sign of the fish is for the age of Pisces. Hence it really comes very much from the disciples of Christ who were sent out to be fishers of men in the age of the fish, in the age of Pisces, to save the lost souls of the fish people, which we still are. Whereas Christ himself was the shepherd, good shepherd, the last in the line of the age of Aries, the shepherd kings, the Hyksos kings, the pharaohs and so forth. So what happened then with Constantine was that Constantine took what was really an underground religion at the time and raised it to become the state religion. Hence the cross was placed as the symbol.
So the cross originated with the Gauls, or does it go older than that?
No, it's much, much older than that, and it goes back in some, you can see it all over the world. It was in South America in 10,000 years ago, particularly northern Scandinavia and so forth. You see boats associated with wheeled crosses in 1300 BC.
Yeah.
And
very arc-like.
Very much so, and there were arcs drawn all over the world. Of course, arc, as you know, has got many connotations, but really it's a boat at the end of the day. And the Egyptians, of course, have crosses. What happened very much was when Christianity went berserk, as so does Islam. They destroyed a lot of the information that was kept at Alexandria, which the Greek Egyptians, if you like, Cleopatra had moved all the information from Heliopolis and placed it in an accessible place at Alexandria. And then of course Christians and Muslims proceeded at various times to destroy it. And I think in those days it wasn't wise to be an intellectual, because you probably had what happened to the librarians. They were taken into the street and the skin and flesh was scraped off while they were alive with abalone shells by these born again zealots.
Right. There's a message to librarians of today.
Oh, absolutely.
You're very brave people.
Very brave people indeed.
So it's originated at least 10,000 years ago?
Yes, it originated at least 10,000 years ago, but there is evidence that such an instrument that I've discovered it to be was probably in existence 32,000 years ago.
32.
Good chance 27,000 years ago in the caves of Lascaux. Now there is a bit of an argument about whether or not the caves of Lascaux were painted 14,000 years ago or 27,000 years ago, but it has to do with carbon dating.
These are the caves in southern France?
These are the caves in southern France. Now what you have as an issue in evidence there is Taurus the bull. Now of course what we see is a herd of bulls galloping across, but some academics researching it found, I think the German academics have found two things. And one, above the shoulder of the bull is the Pleiades, in perfect position for the star sign Taurus as we know it today.
What is the Pleiades? The
Pleiades is Seven Sisters, which is a group of stars which is actually above the constellation of Taurus,
right,
the bull. But also the cycles of the moon below it. So what they see then is that this is really a bull image painted on these cave walls somewhere long before the end of the Ice Age.
Right.
Which is really, you're talking about now zodiacs and astrology, astrologic, mathematical progression of the movements of the stars as they go around the Earth.
And so in relationship to this astrologic, in these caves, the cross was there? Yeah,
but that's not necessarily so, because there's no archaeological evidence. But what the evidence is that there was astrology employed.
Right.
Okay. Now to apply astrology, not in the modern pseudoscience way of looking at astrology, but astrologic, meaning mathematical use of the stars,
right,
requires a measurement of the angle to track them, if you like, to plan them. We certainly know for sure that astrology was employed by Mesopotamians and by Egyptians in 360 degrees, 365 days in a year, which they made up the symbols for. But we know that they employed astrology.
And these are the same ancients who we can find the Celtic cross with, or versions of.
Versions of the Celtic cross.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially the Celtic cross is merely a protractor, a 360 degree protractor, broken down into 2,160 arc minutes,
Right.
which was used by the Mesopotamians and by the Egyptians, and used really to measure the stars, which is why I go back to the caves of Lascaux and say that potentially 27,000 BC they were using some kind of instrument that could measure 360 degrees
Right. Yeah.
by the evidence that there was astrology used.
Right.
But what's really important is the understanding that the ancients in Lascaux and other places in France travelled because of the Venus figurines and because of the mammoth beads and so forth.
So you're saying 27,000 years ago people were navigating?
Yes, they
So-
had to navigate, to travel, and what a lot of people in modern times don't appreciate is because we're born with trains and buses and planes and so forth, is that navigation across land is virtually impossible. And particularly in those days when you try and take on board the mammoths and the giant elk and the huge herds of creatures that were in the plains and tundras and mainlands of continental Europe, were huge creatures before they were made extinct, and extremely dangerous, especially the saber-toothed tiger. And really humanity, in my view, for the last 180,000 years lived on the periphery. And the periphery is the edges of the continent where it joins the sea, and river mouths and places like that, where they weren't really exposed to the massive predators and herds, but yet were able to take advantage of them. And the spread of Venus figurines and the spread of the little beads, perfect little drilled beads made of mammoth tusk, from southern France right into northern Europe and into the Baltic regions and so forth, exactly the same type of manufactured item.
Yeah.
Okay, shows that these people travelled far and wide. To travel far and wide without roads means you have to travel by sea, but to travel by sea is fine. It's just how do you get up and down the estuaries and so forth. So we do still make boats like that. They're made in Ireland. They're called curras, and they're leather-bound boats. They're made of animal skin. And they float in only 18 inches of water. They travel around in this like family groups. There was Caesar in I think around 60 BC who commented that he'd seen boats like this on the Atlantic, up to 60, 70 feet long, and they flew like seagulls over the waves. It was so fast and so light. And so he reported them. We've got some information from that area that was the case. The beauty about those kind of boats is that they can be put in the water and lifted out of the water. And what we find is there's evidence that these boats were turned upside down wherever they landed and used as roofs of houses. And you can see that by sod enclosures or stone enclosures that are boat shaped in Scandinavia, in the UK, in Ireland and so forth, and particularly the standing stones.
Why do you think Scandinavia seems so important to this tale of the Celtic cross and navigation?
Well, I think it's probably because of petroglyphs there. So they managed to recover petroglyphs that show the boats and also the wheel cross. So really when you look at the wheel cross as being a former protractor associated with a boat, then you have to ask the very simple question: if these people were able to travel to the south of France for the winter and then up into the colder regions for the summer, they were probably following the herds. And the great thing about the shallow draft of these boats was that they were able to lie in ambush for the herds as they crossed river mouths and so forth. But I don't think I answered your question there.
No, the Scandinavians seem to be historically important to navigation, because they're the ones that seem to have gone around invading lots of other countries in later times.
Well, there is an issue if you're talking about the Vikings now, but that's much later than you're talking
Are they
27,000
not the descendants
BC.
of the Scandinavians that...
Well, it's very interesting because people do have difficulties by putting countries and labels on these people, and they were known as children of the earth, children of Geb, if you like, as far as the Egyptians were concerned, or sea people. But they didn't live on the land. This is what people can't get their heads around. They lived at sea, or they lived in the peripheries of the sea, and they were completely nomadic, going with the seasons.
Yeah.
Which brings me back to navigation.
Did not people ever set up settlements in these ancient times?
No, I don't think that they did.
Right.
I think that the reason that settlements came about was because of the end of the Ice Age. Now, in the end of the Ice Age, you had mile and a half high cliffs of solid ice, as hard as steel. And anybody who's read about the Titanic knows that ice that's formed in the poles is extremely dense. And it will sink a steel ship.
Yeah.
And when the ice melted, it caused all sorts of ice dams, if you like, that push forward a moraine, and water in the middle raised to a great height. But when the cliffs of ice fell, they caused two tsunamis of unbelievable power. So that wiped out, at the same time as raising the sea levels up to 300 feet, wiping out a lot of our archaeological evidence, I'm sure. It wiped out the herds that the people were relied on for their hunting and for their food, kind of Garden of Eden, if you like, harvesting whatever was going north and south. Well, when the herds became wiped out, what happened was they decided or took on board agriculture. And that agriculture really started around 10 to 12,000 years ago, at the end of the, as we know it, at the end of the last ice age. And it was at that time that they started to settle. But some still stayed hunter-gathering, some settled and become farmers, and came a division, I suppose, between the people. And then there were, of course, people who bridged it, as there are today. There are fishing fleets that go out harvesting the sea,
Yes.
in the same way that farmers harvest the land.
The Celtic cross,
Yeah.
getting back to that, we understand that it was used for navigation,
Yeah.
but then we now know that man settled
Uh-huh.
and created settlements around the world
Yeah.
at the end of the Ice Age. So what was the Celtic cross used for then, if man didn't need to navigate?
Well, man still needed to navigate,
Okay.
so that's only part of it.
So
Man-
trading and...
Yeah, trading and moving around, and still, I suppose, following the seasons to a degree.
Right.
Um,
Can the Celtic cross be used for anything else?
well, the thing about the Celtic cross is it really is an ancient concept, is as above, so below. What people don't realise, I suppose, is that before the advent of the watch, the creation of the watch, which is by Harrison, I suppose, right, in the 18th century, was the solving of longitude. Right? And the watch was named the watch after the watch keeping at sea, or
Oh,
keeping
right.
watch.
Right.
Okay, which may get some of our listeners interested because of the Watchers and the followers of Horus.
Mm-hmm.
So come back to what it was then. The Celtic cross was a protractor that reflected the wheels of stars. Wheels of stars means zodiacs, which is zodiac, if you like. It's the arc of stars, the wheel of stars,
Yeah.
a wheel of animals.
Right.
And so the Celtic cross was a protractor based on that, based on the 360 degrees of stars that surround the sun and surround the earth, from which we kept time, from which we kept watch.
Right.
So the wheel cross of the Celtic cross is also a clock,
Okay.
a reflection of time by the stars.
Which is of paramount importance for people who were growing crops.
Absolutely, and also for the ceremonies that go with the thanksgiving from the sun. Now, it should go back to the Celtic cross and understand that wheel cross, or Odin's wheel, or the Celtic cross is known as a solar symbol.
Right.
What people didn't realise was that it actually tracked the sun. See, the stars themselves are fixed. Most of them are fixed, and certainly in our lifetimes they're fixed.
Yeah.
And really what the ancients did was they fixed the stars, gave them names from a shamanistic, animistic background, so that you find zodiac creatures different from different cultivations, okay,
Yeah.
different peoples of the world,
Yeah.
use different types of symbology, but mostly it's based on what they see in nature around them,
Right.
in the same as the as above so below shamanistic concept, animistic way.
Was there any animal that was the same?
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because of course in Egypt they talk about the lion very much as being Leo, which we still use now, which the Greeks used,
Right.
which logically is an acceptable way to go on, because the Greeks conquered Egypt, therefore they took some of their symbology. But there are some different kinds of zodiac signs that could be said to be the same, but it's actually not important.
Yeah.
What's important is, look, let me give you an example. Southern Hemisphere, there is a constellation called the Typewriter. So that was named in our time by something that we were familiar with to recognize. So the idea of a zodiac sign is that you recognize that area of the sky by joining up the dots by using image.
Yeah.
Okay, to join up the dots so that you could pass to your children's children or to anybody else a universal sign to recognize a position in the sky.
Okay.
Okay.
And does that give you a position of yourself on Earth?
In what way do you mean?
To know where you are?
Yes, it doesn't in itself. Okay, a zodiac sign doesn't in itself. It's what's between you and the zodiac sign.
Yes.
Now, for instance, the sun comes between you and the zodiac sign. So we have a very obvious thing that isn't well appreciated. If the Egyptians understood the zodiac as we know it in 360 degrees, and they also said such things as birth signs or sun signs, in other words, you were born in the age of Pisces or in Leo or so forth, you were born in the sign of Pisces or Leo, that would be called a birth sign or a sun sign or a star sign. It's quite obvious when you think about it that they had to know the Earth was round and that the Earth actually went round the Sun. It's impossible not to do so, because the star sign of Leo, if you were born in the age of, or in the time of Leo, okay, or in the day of Leo, I'm sorry, the sun is between you and that star sign. Therefore you can't see it, it's daylight.
Right.
And the only way that you can tell what star sign the sun is in is to know what's the opposite of it the night before.
Right.
So when you look at the night before at midnight, you look at the star sign in the sky, you're looking out into space. when you look into inner space towards the sun and try to see the star sign on the other side of the sun, you can't do it, so it's daylight.
Why do
So you would need to know
Yeah,
that the Earth went round the sun, and you would need to know that the Earth was round.
absolutely. Why do you think it's important to know whether you were born in Leo?
I don't personally think it's important to know
Why
what.
did the ancients?
Well, they believed that the energy of life, that life itself, okay, that electromagnetic energy, whatever you want to call it, that spark of life came from the sun.
Right.
They were very wise. They knew what we know scientifically today, that we are actually solar energy. What we eat, for instance, an apple, or we drink a bottle of wine. Now, one of the greatest examples, it gets more expensive as time goes by, but I like to buy a bottle of wine that was created the day my friend was born, or a friend was born, to give it to them as a birthday present, because what I'm doing is giving them a bottle of bottled solar energy from the year that they were born. As I said, it gets more expensive as I get older and they get older. But the concept behind it is that the grape that absorbed the sunlight through the leaves of the vine is now bottled energy, okay? And because you consume it, it becomes part of you, and therefore you are sunlight. Now, we know that that's true today, but they knew it then. So what they said is the day that you were born was very important because of the influences of the positive and negative. And they cut it up like that, didn't they? They said, you know, earth, wind, fire and water, different solar energies dependent on the season.
Yeah.
And of the influences of the planets that were around it created different characters in their view.
So this is the sun as the father of light, giving
Sun
us,
being
giving
father
us life.
Giving us life. So if you think about the father-mother relationship, then the father seeds the earth with energy and created that energy together with the soil of the earth, or with the seed of mankind, or the seed of a lion, or the seed of a bird, or any of the species combined together creates a new life
Yeah.
with the combination of those two items. So they saw that very clearly. And of course, we know that that's true today. That's exactly how it is.
And that's where the origin of the worship of the sun.
Well,
And-
yes, I think that there were a lot of disputes, particularly in ancient Egypt, about this,
Yeah.
whereby people actually the priests, if you like, worshipped the age of the zodiac sign. In other words, what they were doing was they were worshipping the creative and destructive cycles of time. So they saw that as a pantheon of gods, which was based on the zodiacs. What happened was Akhenaten, he started a religion that really our monotheistic society comes from, which was based on that the sun gives life, and therefore the sun is the creator and the destroyer. And so from that point of view, he upset the priests, as it was, of Amun, which means Aries, Amun, Amen, that we say at the end of the Lord Prayer.
One thing that's always seen with this solar image of the atom
Yes.
is the serpent. Can you explain what you think?
Yes, the serpent around the atom, and it's actually said, I think, in the Book of the Dead and so forth, is that the sun, the north pole of the sun in astrology is directly in the first coil of the serpent as we know it. Well, funnily, in England we call it the worm. The Chinese call it the dragon, and so do a lot of Eastern ones, and it has many names. And in one part in Egypt they didn't have it as a dragon or a serpent at all, but they had it as a combination creature of hippopotamus, a lion, and a crocodile. And the reason for that was because it kills you as well as gives you life. It gives you life and it gives you death. It's dualistic in its way. As it spins, this serpent in the sky, which we know as the constellation Draconis, as it spins above the north pole of the sun, it takes away your life. So for instance, 70 times annual spin of that is your lifetime,
Right.
from birth to death. Okay, so it controls both the forces of creation and destruction as they saw it.
And so it also measures time.
Measures time. So it spins at the rate of slightly less than 1 degree every 24 hours. So that's as the Earth travels around the Sun. But it also spins at the rate of 15 degrees every hour to give you the daily spin. So as the Earth spins, it spins, but at the same time at midnight, every night, it starts 1 degree slightly off its previous night's position.
That's incredibly accurate.
Incredibly
And
accurate.
so the ancients could have, the Egyptians, whoever they might be, would have been able to really hone down on the time of day,
Yes, they would.
let alone the time of year.
Yes, they would, but you have to ask the question, which is the question I asked. Okay, if they could do that, what did they do it with?
And
You
it's
see.
the Celtic cross.
And the wheel crossing, well, actually, the Egyptians developed it into a far more sophisticated instrument than the Celtic cross,
Right.
which is accurate. The one I've made is as a copy of the Dixon relics, still partly in the pyramid and partly in the British Museum. It's accurate to 3 arc minutes.
Can you explain these Dixon relics to the people who don't know anything?
Yeah, Dixon relics were found in 1872 by a gentleman called Wayman Dixon. And a helper he had called Bill Grundy, and they were inside the Great Pyramid and noticed a tiny gap in the wall in the Queen's Chamber, and Bill Grundy was asked if he would breach the gap, knock it out, in other words. So he took a hammer and a chisel, wouldn't be able to do that today, and knocked this gap out, and what they found was shafts. And what they thought they were was air shafts, but when they breached the north shaft of the Queen's Chamber, some items fell out. And the items were a 1 pound 3 ounce ball of bluish grey granite, and a little bronze hook in the shape of the Aries sign, or the sign of Amun Amen. Okay, certainly it's the Greek sign for Aries. And also what looked like was recorded to be part of a cubit roll.
You say recorded to be?
It was recorded to be that by Piazzi Smythe, who was the Astronomer Royal for Scotland. Because what happened was Wayman Dixon boxed these up into a cigar box and sent them back to Edinburgh, where they became obscurely lost and so forth. But it was recorded by Piazzi Smythe, the Astronomer Royal. He measured and weighed them, and
So what do you believe happened to this rod?
the rod's still in the pyramid.
It is still, yeah.
It's still in the pyramid. It was the last time we saw it, because a guy called Rudolf Gantenbrink put up a tiny robot under the direction of Zahi Hawass, director of Egyptian antiquities. What happened was he created this robot to clear what were considered at the time to be air shafts, and are now said by Zahi Hawass and Mark Lenner of the Egyptian antiquities to be soul shafts, to clear them of debris, because what was happening was there was a lot of condensation being formed by visitors within the pyramids, and it was doing a damage to the inside. So to clear these shafts, you can get some air in, and that will take the humidity down. And in the King's Chamber shafts, they fitted fans, as I understand it, to blow air in and out. But what happened was that Gantenbrink, in sending his robot up the shaft, sent one up the north shaft of the Queen's Chamber, and at the top of the shaft can still be seen, under a rod that was reputedly sent up by Wayman Dixon at the time, and it's jammed up there, underneath it a very thin lat of wood with a fractured end, and then another piece with holes in it, which show that the little Aries hook fitted those.
Right.
So what we can tell from that, because that artifact was still there in 1993 and filmed to be so for posterity, was that part of the rod was still up the shaft at that time. However, since then, the Egyptian antiquities have sent up further robots. What they were really interested in was finding out what was lay behind the doors at the top of these shafts.
Right.
And no report has been made, since the robot would have had to have climbed over the one in the North Shore, would have to have climbed over the lad. No report was made or any filming done of that at that time.
So that's the discovery of the Dixon relics and what they are. So how did this relate to the Celtic cross?
Well, what really happened, if you take you back to the beginning, when I discovered the Celtic cross originally, what had happened in this was in 1997. I had heard through various authors and academics that the Great Pyramid of Giza was aligned to the North Pole Star. That troubled me, of course, because there was no pole star at the time. But having said that it was aligned. And also I looked at it, because I've got a background in design and architecture, and so has my family, and I thought, well, the instruments that they have are not adequate for the job. This is one of the most sophisticated buildings in the world. In the whole of our world now, there is not a building, even of smaller size, that is so well aligned. It's only a few centimetres out, and quite remarkable, apart from the tonnage of weight and so forth. I thought, this is not adequate. There were two instruments that we know about. One was called the Bay and the other one was called the Merchet. And these two instruments were plumb lines. One was really based on a palm leaf, and the other one is based on sort of if you like, an upright stick with a cross member sticking out of one side and then a plumb line hanging down it to get alignments. But neither of those instruments would do what's vitally important. What's vitally important to design something like the Great Pyramid, which incorporates its latitude and also the circumference of the Earth and the precession of the equinoxes, plus the seasons and the 12 signs of the zodiac, all in one phenomenal conurbation. This is not just as Khufu's pyramid, but as the complete group of the Giza necropolis, if you like. Was that it needed an instrument that could measure not just vertical angles, but horizontal angles. And that's the difficulty, and there was no instrument that could do that. And archaeology at the time, you must remember this is a long time ago now, it is 10 years, and there are people who are professors now in archaeology that were still at school when I made this discovery. Was that there was no instrument that would measure. And what kind of instrument would we be looking for? Well, we would be looking for an instrument that acted as a modern theodolite. Every housing estate that's ever built, everything that's ever constructed, the levels and the falls and the design and everything, you see guys out with, they've got white or yellow hats on, and they've got theodolites, and theodolites are for finding measurements and angles and so forth. And even when we create motorways and roads, highways if you like, the surveyor always aligns them to the pole stars. They need to find true north so that they can get their alignments right and so forth. So I'm looking for an instrument that can do that. I'm looking for an instrument that can act as a theodolite, and I can't find one. I was experimenting in my back garden. I thought, well, I know they've got pieces of wood, you know, so let's muck about with a piece of wood. And what you should know, as well as having an understanding of surveying and construction and architecture, I'm also a sailor, so I have an understanding of navigation. And navigation for sailor also comes from understanding the stars. And in modern navigation and in modern astronomy, we still use zodiac signs.
Right.
Okay, that's really important. We divide the sky up into 360 degrees, all lined out beautifully on a grid, and we recognize the parts of the sky we're looking at by the constellations. Okay, so I'm looking at that, and I'm looking at astronomy, and I'm looking at my navigation experience, and I'm looking at my construction experience and my design experience, and I'm saying, how can I do it? So let's get a piece of wood. Let's start there. So take a piece of wood and stick it up to the pole star, okay, and sight along it. Fine, that's cool. That works, but not very well. It doesn't work very well because my hand isn't as steady as it ought to be, and so it shakes around this tiny dot in the sky. I need a support, so I need a fulcrum. A fulcrum, like a crossbar. I'm trying to make a T-piece now. So I make a T-piece, okay, and I balance the crossbar on a stick, and then I can get back and I can sort of sit down on my hunkers, or I can kneel down and I can sight up at the sky, and it's steady. Fine. That's great. What else did the Egyptians have that will help me? Well, I need to be able to make a scale, and I need to be able to make, I know the Egyptians used 360 degrees. They're great at architecture. We know that they were great at geometry. We know that. So let's have a look at that. Okay, we know they have wheels, and there's expressions of wheels with it, so we don't have any difficulty with that. And we know something else that's very important. There was a law in Egypt, and that was particularly used in the weighing of the heart ceremony, which made it a law, was a plumb line. When they do the weighing in the heart ceremony, they made scales, and the scales were weighing the heart against, in the canopic jar of the pharaoh, against the feather of truth, known as the feather of Maat. And if the heart was heavier than the feather of truth, honesty, justice, and so forth, then what happened is the pharaoh would be regenerated, and he wouldn't go to heaven, he wouldn't become a star. And this was the judgment that was placed on him for the way in which he looked after his people and ran his life. Well, they used a plumb line on the scales. They used it because it was a law, and they had to make sure that it was absolutely bang on, otherwise it would send the pharaoh in the wrong direction. If you get my meaning.
Yes.
And so we know that plumb lines were important. We know that the Egyptians used them to a great degree, and so let's just use a plumb line. So what's the basic thing we need? Well, we need a wheel, and we need to stick it on an upright, and we need a crossbar to sight along. But we also need something else. We need to be able to look at it in a horizontal direction as well as a vertical direction. And so we put a wheel on, and this is exactly what I did. I put a wheel on, and I marked it out in 360 degrees using a simple protractor, extending the lines out so I could get it. And I got into my back garden, and I sighted the pole star, and I checked it against the GPS, and it was like within 20 miles.
Did you realise at that time that it looked like?
No, that was the whole point. I was standing there doing this, and found myself kneeling in front of the cross. And sighting the pole star, and it suddenly just hit. I thought, what is this? I've got a Celtic cross in my hand. I've seen these all my life. You know?
You weren't onto the Celtic cross at
Wasn't
that time?
onto the Celtic cross at all at the time.
Right.
And what happened was I found that this was the only way in which I, using primitive thought, could basically measure an angle in the way that I wanted to. So I found that. Surprised, went off, researched it, did everything I could to research it on the internet. And
does this relate to the Dixon relics?
Well, yes, it does, and I'll tell you why. What happened was that I got distracted then, because I got, this is a Celtic cross, surely this is obvious, but I've never heard of it. Remember, I've been in surveying and navigation, I've done some astronomy, and so I've never heard of a cross and a wheel on it as being an instrument for measurement with a plumb line. And I went off and researched it, and then came up with all the things throughout the world of Celtic crosses and wheel crosses, and the connection with Scandinavia, Ireland, and the Vikings, all of this sort of business. And then eventually, after a period of about 1.5 years of research, went back to the Great Pyramid, which is what had started me investigating in the first place. And that's how I came about to see the Dixon relics for what they were, because prior to seeing the Dixon relics for what they were, if I hadn't have discovered the wheel cross, I wouldn't have recognised them. Okay, so What I found was that a more accurate way of, rather than a gigantic wheel cross, of dividing down each degree into arc minutes, okay, was to make what's known as an exponential scale. Now, an exponential scale is very simple. It's like the rays of the sun, or any angle that goes from the center of 0 outward.
Like the rays of the sun seen on the Akhenaten.
Absolutely,
The sun.
exactly right. And so that, in fact, in that case, you can also say that Akhenaten was quite well aware
Yes.
of this. Which is very similar to the rays of the sun from pictures of Akhenaten, showing life coming from the sun. The exponential scale is really a quarter of a circle, and it makes it much more accurate to do so, to make it like this, so that 1 degree comes broken down into 10 parts, similar to the decans, stars used by the Egyptians for measuring 36 decans times 10 is 360 degrees. And breaking it down, it breaks it down into arc minutes. It makes it a much smaller item to use for measuring with a plumb line. So if you can see that mounted on a cross staff, up and down, the plumb line hung from the top here, and what happens is the line, as it's tilted, measures off the angle along the degrees and arc minutes. And this is actually accurate to 3 arc miles at the equator of the Earth, which is very, very accurate indeed. It's 3 nautical miles, or 3 arc minutes, is a distance to the horizon, the place of time, the zone of Horus, if you like. And so I looked for an exponential scale, and the reason I wanted an exponential scale is that you reduce the size of the instrument. It's almost like a vernier. It reduces the size of the instrument from a wheel. So you have a very simple scale rule, and of course it sprang to mind at the time, you know, things like the yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, your rod and your staff will comfort me, means something now. But the exponential scale broke it down to arc minutes, and it broke it down to an accuracy of 3 arc minutes. Now I knew that they were very good in textiles and so forth, so that they could make a thread strong enough yet thin enough to be measured, but also by knowing the width of the measurement of it, they could come down to the finest detail of measurement. But 3 arc minutes is remarkable accuracy. Let me tell you why. An arc minute is equal to a nautical mile at the Earth's circumference. And so now it all starts to knit together, because it was accurate to 3 arc minutes, brings it within the viewable horizon at the equator of 3 miles. So in other words, if you can find, by using the stars, a measurement within 3 arc minutes, you can be pretty sure you were in 3 nautical miles, or within the view of the horizon. Now, of course, that opens up other things. What does horizon mean? Well, it's Horus, you know. Horus is about time, zone, the time of place, horizon. We use words nowadays and we forget the roots of where they come. The cross in its time was a very powerful instrument, a weapon of war, if you like. If you could find the time, and you could judge the season, and you could measure your enemy's land or your own land, and you could bring your ships and your troops to any position you wanted at precisely the right time, it's a powerful, powerful weapon.
Especially in
its
times
time.
of like the English and the Spanish and the French, who were empire building.
Very possibly, and certainly there's evidence to that effect. But I'm very cautious about making judgment, because what I have found is very like the atomic bomb. It's the concept of, can you uninvent it, and what was it for? What fascinated me about the cross was that it became buried and lost and hidden or not hidden or forgotten or whatever you want to call it. Those are all very emotive words. Was it lost? Was it hidden? Was it forgotten? Or was it a combination of all those sort of things? It still couldn't die. That's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
That no matter what people do, they can't get rid of something that's there, even if it goes underground. And the book I wrote, I must say, the book I wrote is called The Golden Thread of Time, because this knowledge is hung by a thread throughout time.
A lot of the time these lost things, we won't call them secrets, but these lost things are found in symbolism within things like secret societies and religion.
Yes.
Did you find confirmation in anything?
Yes. It's fragmented. I mean, the cross is actually available in, let me give you an example, sextant. We talked about sextant earlier on as part of a navigational tool. It means the 60th part of a circle. Prior to the sextant, which was only invented after Harrison's chronometer, prior to that it was called the quadrant, which means a quarter of a circle. Now in between there was an oddball one which was called the octant, which means an 8th part of a circle. But you see, to call them parts of circles, which is what they're saying, acknowledges that previously there was a full circle. An issue, don't we? I mean, let me give you an example. The formation of the written language is pretty well known to be a development that came about through necessity after it became forbidden to use graven image. Right. So when it became forbidden in the Ten Commandments to use graven image, you now have an issue, don't you? The sign S means and sounds like serpent. So we're not allowed to draw serpents anymore because it's a graven image. So we make a very clever code, and that code becomes a letter. And then language is a letter. Very simplistic way of looking at it, but let's say that that's a way of doing it. Let's look at Greek mathematics. Now, Greek mathematics is totally unnecessary. I can teach a child to create a pyramid, incorporate pi, the golden section, square the circle, all the great Greek mathematical problems in 3 minutes flat. A child of 4 can do it every time, never make a mistake.
Why are we
simple geometry?
So why are we so distracted from these basically core truths?
Very difficult to answer that question. People become fragmented. I've said many times before, it's not the ordinary person's fault. At the end of the day, they don't know, but very much in the beginning of this conversation we were talking about how I felt about the end of the Ice Age and what the teachers were saying. Well, the teachers were only saying what they'd been told to say. Case of the blind following the blind, you know. And was it they say in the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, doesn't kind of help either. but the point very much is, what did your parents tell you? What did school tell you? Do you think for yourself? Or do you just accept that which is told to you?
So it's relevant for people today because...
It's relevant for people today because if you don't know where you came from, you don't know where you're going. And I guess from a lot of people's point of view, it shows that our ancestors were far more intelligent cerebrally than perhaps we are today, but that might not be fair. It could be that we're more specialised today and then we fail to look outside the box. It's the only instrument that will operate in the absence of GPS systems, and also and this is what you've got to take on board, which is really important, it operates in the absence of compasses. Now, as you may or may not know, the Earth is starting to go into a magnetic reversal. It only happens every 100 and so thousand years, they say. The Sun goes into a magnetic reversal every 11.5 years, standard, but the Earth, not so. But going into magnetic reversal, according to those scientists that are surveying it now, may not happen for the next 1,000 years. Certainly has been happening for the last couple of hundred years, because we're recording a reduction in the magnetic force on the Earth of around 10 degrees over that period of time. That it would take around about 2,000 years for it to redress itself and become stable. Now, so we've got magnetic reversals, quite complex thing to talk about, but if you can imagine, it's very much like the old oil lava lamps of water and oil. And so what we've got is little north poles appearing. The last one they recorded was up here, little north pole off the south of South Africa in the southern hemisphere. And so if magnets don't work anymore, and there's an anomaly for finding your position, yes, you need to use the stars again. So certainly the principles involved in the Celtic cross are useful from a survival point of view. In terms of GPS systems, certainly what's happening is we've got increasing amount of global warming, which in my investigations shows to be more solar based, which brings us back to the sort of sun symbol again, the creator of life. Certainly our ancestors would have said that the global warming that we're experiencing over the last 100 years, which is accelerating, is caused by the sun, since it's our heat source. Is that the magnetic flares and so forth that come about, next peak solar maximum is in the year 2012, could knock out our GPS systems, could knock out our satellites and so forth. And yes, you do have an alternative method of navigation, but you need to resurrect the ancient ways to do that.
The ancients saw things in a great many ways and together,
yes,
in unison.
Yes.
So there would be a spiritual element to it as well.
Yes.
Do you see that from your researches?
Yes, very much so. And I think again that's the issue. And one of the things that science has an issue with religion, and religion has an issue with science, is because of the misunderstandings of the interpretations in a religion often, but also because of the persecution of scientists in the last few hundred years. And so that caused a division between the two, and the two concepts couldn't merge. But of course, man, as I say, man doesn't live by bread alone, and so we're all spiritual creatures as well as we're practical creatures, and we need to keep balance there and be able to do both. I often find in lectures I'm trying to talk to people who are right-brained, and there are people there who are left-brained, and you're trying to please all of the people all the time, but that's actually not my problem. It's their problem if they don't make an effort. And one of the things, a lot of human beings at the moment spend a lot of time on physical health, and I always found that's important, but within degrees. For instance, if we were supposed to be the strongest creatures on Earth, we would have giant muscles. If we were supposed to be the fastest runners or the greatest killers, then we would be horrendous creatures with very little brain. And we were not put there for that. The most powerful muscle we have is our brain, and it needs exercising. You can only do that when you're alive, so you need to exercise your brain by thinking. I guess that's quite important. Yeah.
And using the cross exercises the brain.
Well, it certainly brings you in line with nature again. It brings you closer to what nature's all about and the cycles of time. And
so this would have been sacred.
Yes, it would have been sacred. And I was asked the other day by somebody, I understand that the South American Indians didn't use wheels. Well, yeah, that's very much like we have an issue with why people used quadrants rather than a cross. because a cross became a sacred item. It's a sacred thing, really.
The cross has been a solar symbol for an awful long time, hasn't it?
Long before Christianity.
And is that why in your opinion, is that why Christianity used the cross?
Well, Christianity absorbed many things. Pagan religions absorbed very much into itself. Those things like Christmas, all the celebrations that were more zodiac based, if you like, or astrologically based, or spiritually based on what they call paganism, were absorbed into Christianity as the new religion gathered strength.
And the cross is at the centre of Christianity, really.
Well, actually, the fish is.
The fish is, okay.
Pisces is, but it has become so since Constantine.
Yes.
And has become the centre of Christianity. And really what it is a computer for measuring the earth, the time, the sun, the moon.
Is there any relationship to nailing Christ to the cross?
It's quite interesting that an ex-minister said to me, that makes sense to me. He said, because Christ was then neither on the earth nor in heaven, but pinned in that moment of time between both.
welcome to Gardener's World. Today I have the great pleasure of having a man who I've known for an awful long time, a good friend of mine, but also a man who has managed to get 2 patents on a religious icon. This is one of the patents. Incredibly, Crichton Miller has managed to get patents on the Celtic cross, a device, a religious icon that we see all over the world, from in Wales, in Ireland, in Scotland, and I've just come back from Norway where we saw them everywhere, on top of serpent churches and even on great cathedrals. Crichton has actually written a best-selling book, The Golden Thread of Time, which is a stunning read and really important that people read this. And we also did a film together called The Cross of Thoth. Crichton's also extensively lectured, not least of which being invited to lecture at Cambridge University to peers. So he really does have some excellent background to this, and it's provable stuff. So I am very pleased to welcome Crichton. Crichton, thank you so much for coming on my show. I really do appreciate it. Well, the first question, of course, is obviously, how on earth and why did you patent the Celtic cross?
Well, it's a long story really, but the end up, I guess, is that the patent is probably the toughest kind of peer review you can get.
Right.
And since there's very little in the field of archaeoastronomy, or the field in which I work, which started out as an amateur thing, if you like, to making a discovery, I thought that was the best way to go. So it was quite surprising to me to be granted not 1 but 2 patents on this instrument.
That's incredible.
Now, the cross then has turned out in the sense of the British Patent Office as being an instrument capable of astronomy, navigation and surveying, which of course are the 3 basic principles of our civilization and incorporate the mathematics of our civilization. In fact, even the mathematics that sent us to the moon.
But I mean, your background in this is you are an expert navigator anyway, aren't you?
I like to think I'm expert. Stop me hitting the rocks. But yes, I have sailed and used sextants, and so I understand the principles of navigation or astronavigation using the stars, and that was a great help to me.
Especially, I mean, sextant strikes me as being something that's almost part of the Celtic cross. It seems to be a section.
Yes, and probably a little bit in advance, but the sextant means a 6th or a 60th part of a circle.
Yeah.
And so what we're really looking for in terms of answering the mysteries of ancient people, how did they build stone circles, how did they build the great pyramids across the world,
and how did they get around the world?
Yeah, and how did they, navigate the oceans of the world. A lot of people who are not sailors don't appreciate that in most cases, unless there are mountain ranges, the moment you're 3 or 4 miles offshore, you have nothing to see but sea and sky.
Yeah.
And so they don't appreciate that navigation is necessary just for going coast to coast.
You can't measure water. So
absolutely,
you would have to
moving all the time. And so what the ancients had to do to be able to overcome that was to be able to measure the position of the sun during the day and measure the position of the moon against background stars at night.
So how did you come to this?
Well, I came to this really by trying to resolve the problem of how the pyramids, the Great Pyramids of Giza, purely from a curious point of view, and because I wanted to understand if there had been any earth shifts, to see how they could be aligned to the North Pole star. Well, of course, a lot of people don't realize that the North Pole star that we have now, called Polaris, isn't the pole star that the Egyptians had when they built the Great Pyramids.
And why is that?
Well, because of a phenomenon called precession of the equinoxes, or lunisolar precession, which means the Earth wobbles. And just to demonstrate that for you, I brought a special globe that I've made. And the special globe that I've made shows not just the rotation of the Earth itself, which is very important with the background of stars, but also that the Earth, over a period of 25,920 years, actually changes where the North Pole points at.
It's like a wobble.
It's a wobble, and it wobbles through, which is quite interesting, it wobbles at 23.4 degrees. Newton said it was 46.8 degrees arc that was described in the sky by lunisolar precession.
Right.
The effect of that is that it moves the celestial pole. In other words,
From our perception, the planet.
yes, in a way, what it means is that the North Pole of the Earth carves a circle through the stars. Very interestingly, though, there's been no pole star until the 14th century, since 2800 BC.
And which was it then?
And then it was Alpha Draconis, or in the Draconian constellation,
Right.
which is the only permanent thing that we have. I think the movement
Is this
around.
one of the reasons why on Celtic Cross, I mean, one of the things that I noticed greatly in your way
Yes.
was the fact that the Celtic Cross over there seemed to always be in relationship to the dragon or the serpent.
Dragon or serpent is a worldwide theme and absolutely essential for understanding the principles of time. I don't know if many people realize that the word temple means place of measurement of time, from tempo, and so forth. So
It's a very sacred thing then, measuring time,
a very
measuring
sacred
planets.
thing. And in fact, anything, one would say that the use of the cross outside the temple would make it profane.
Yes, I'm reminded of the Egyptians, for instance, who we break things down today, don't we, into sciences.
Yes.
But to the Egyptians, it seemed to be there was a priest astronomer, a priest doctor.
That is correct.
It was always a sacred thing that was being done.
Up until the 17th century, in Europe, there was a combination between the church and the crown. And because the crown, the kings were called rulers, which means measurers, and supported. So what you had is a kind of science, a hidden science for the elite, which allowed the ruling, in combination with spirituality. And the spirituality came from the understanding and measuring of nature itself.
Yes.
And of course, we bring us back to the cross then. So an example of the cross would be...
So this is very much like you would see it in stone, but
Yeah.
you've recreated it in wood.
Yeah, this is one I made earlier.
Sticky back plastic.
Yes, and indicatively what you have here is the four seasons, which is from those two there. What's quite interesting on it is that on this particular one we have the sign of the 8, which of course is the eternal number.
Yes.
It's infinity. But what's not recognized, of course, is that 360 degrees around a circle, which was used by the Mesopotamians and also by the Egyptians, is almost equal to 365 days in a year. So consequently, the idea behind a Celtic cross is that it should actually spin. Okay, so it spins on 2 occasions
I mean,
there.
that image is just going to blow people away. Because we've all been seeing this thing in stone.
Well, they see it as a gravestone,
Yeah.
and it's put on a grave for a purpose.
Yeah.
Those that were Gnostic or knowledgeable put it on the grave as an instrument for people to navigate their way to heaven, and heaven is the stars, of course.
Now, I see a very historical link there. You use the word Gnostic.
Yes.
And this has become a Celtic symbol to us.
Yes.
And of course, the Celtic Church,
Yes,
we know probably came from early Gnostics or Essene.
yes.
So this is some kind of hidden wisdom, maybe.
It's a hidden wisdom, an ancient one that I can trace back at least 36,000 years. but-
36,000 years.
Yes, and it had to do with hunter-gatherers during the Ice Age being able to measure time to move in their boats to head off herds of
Yeah.
the annual herds and follow them to hunt them and gather
So
them.
you're saying that this device, or a device similar to this,
Yes.
has been used for at least 36,000 years?
Certainly there are images of it even 1400 BC in Scandinavia, carved in glyphs on the rocks with ships. So you see this symbol
The
used.
link between navigation and the symbol.
Navigation, absolutely essential, because to tell the time, you need to tell the time to be able to navigate. And to navigate, you need to be able to use the stars, as the Polynesians have proven. They could find tiny islands just by using grid references of stars at the right time of the year. So to learn this technique required a lifetime of being trained by previous experts or masters.
Like
in
the
it.
Sufi baraka, the wisdom is passed on from one to the next.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So the idea then is what we would call astrology, or astrological symbols, meaning astrologic, meaning mathematics of the stars rather than astronomy, which is naming of the stars.
Yes.
Unfortunately, that's become named as pseudoscience because of the foolishness of astrologers, and the fact that they don't measure the stars. So we'll talk about ancient astronomers.
Yeah.
So ancient astronomers then named the stars by making constellations, draw the dots, if you like, draw the lines between the dots to make animal features from their animistic.
Which is good for memory.
Absolutely. So the capacity, well, look at the shape of that, that's a lion.
Yeah. That's good for teaching.
Yeah.
Good for memory.
And the Mesopotamians, 2,500 BC, created some of those symbols that we still use today, like Leo, Scorpio,
And they're seen on a wheel.
And they're seen on the wheel, and they're named into symbols now. So at the top of here, we have a symbol which they call the fleur-de-lis, which is on the top of all navigational sea charts. And it's quite ancient. It goes way back. In fact, they've got one in the Vatican. But that's similar, if you look, to this symbol here, which is the Aryan symbol for Aries.
Yeah.
Okay, and called point of Aries at the rising point of the sun.
Mm-hmm.
But in the case of the fleur-de-lis, it's this with an additional point.
So how does this bear any relation?
Well, it has great connection to the pyramids, which I'll come to later if you wish to discuss that.
Well, yeah.
How the pyramids were built.
Yeah, let's get back to the pyramids, because this is where you first started with.
Yes. Well, I started with the pyramids because I wanted to find out how they were aligned. We all know that there was an astrological or a star cult society that lasted 5,000 years, living in balance without, without causing mayhem and changing their systems for so long. And of course, that was why the row about Amun was. But a lot of people don't realize that the priests of Amun were actually the priests of Amen, and we still call on Amen at the end of the Lord's Prayer. Mm-hmm. So what we're actually calling on is the return of the age of Aries when we say Amen. It doesn't mean so say all of us.
Which is the symbol you've just shown us.
Correct.
So
and that is Aries.
This symbol?
The symbol is that's the Aryan sign. But during the building of the Great Pyramids, 2160 to 2800 BC, this would be the time of the age of Aries, whereas we still now live, believe it or not, in the age of Pisces. We've got about another 70 years to go before it becomes the age of Aquarius.
Oh, right, so the 70s were all wrong then.
Very difficult, because the astrologers who call these ages, the astrologers who call these ages are operating on Greek charts, and they forgot to take precession into account, which I showed you earlier with the moving globe. So the charts that they use are whole 30 degrees out of date in one whole star sign. Right. So those that think they're a Virgo or a Leo and
so they need to get back to what you said before, measuring the stars.
Yes, well, very important, because even Moses said it, when they built a fatted calf, which was the sign of the bull, that they were living in the age of Aries. He got furious and threw the stones at them and killed a few of them by stoning and so forth for not living in the moment, but for living in the past.
Yes.
Which was
many messages in there.
Many messages in there. Yeah. So going back, so they were able, and this is very important because there's a philosophy behind this. Not only were they using science to measure the earth and to measure angles and to create mathematics, which is a scientific instrument and symbol, they were also putting the philosophy behind what understanding the nature of time meant. In other words, the nature of cause and effect. Hence, most of our religious texts tell us how to behave based on the laws of cause and effect, which we seem to have forgotten in the modern world.
So this is how the sacred and the literal
mesh together.
Yes,
with this archetypal instrument. Yeah. Now, of course, you mentioned sextants earlier on. In fact, you just put that away. You mentioned sextants earlier on, and they used quadrants and sextants as a deference to the circle. In other words, quadrant means a quarter.
We've
part
got about
of
a
circle.
minute left, so.
I'm sorry. So what happened was, because it was banned to use this religious icon for many years, they invented this, which is called an astrolabe.
Mm-hmm.
And the astrolabe has exactly the same principle, designed into four, but it doesn't have a stick on it, so it doesn't look like
And of course,
crucifix.
star.
Astrolabe meaning measuring the stars, and even Chaucer talked about that in his treatise to an astrolabe. He knew the world was round, and that was back in the 14th century. So that could be read by anybody.
Fascinating stuff. So the astrolabe was used.
Yeah. But basically,
still used today.
yes, basically what I made is a modern instrument. And the modern instrument shows the cross as a protractor, which is what it really is. And it's able to measure spherically.
I mean, that protractor, that piece of plastic that you've got is incredible. And if this thing really is so clever and accurate, surely it's something that, you know, everybody on the planet should know about, in case there's some natural disaster, or, you know, suddenly our GPS systems don't work. You know, we all really need to know how this thing works. So kindly explain.
Okay, that's a good statement, because in fact GPS system works exactly the same way.
Does it really?
Yeah, a GPS is a satellite based in the sky from which we bounce a signal back, and then we relate the angle of that signal to the center of the Earth, and that by bisecting the Earth's surface shows us where we are.
I didn't know that.
Now, that's exactly what the ancients did with this instrument, except they used stars instead of a GPS system. You required a little more brain power, and it also required a clear sky, which is pretty tricky on a
Satellite's a bit further away.
Absolutely. So a satellite is far more efficient, but exactly the same principle. So if you think about the cross then as being a receiver, and that the user then would be able to work out by eyeing along the crossbar the angle of a star in the sky in relation to the center of the Earth, thus bisecting the Earth's center and showing the latitude.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the center of the Earth, the gravity that pulls, that's another constant?
Yes, it is. And the constant, the most important thing behind that is the idea of a plumb line. I remember when we were talking earlier on, I mentioned that the center part of the draconis symbol was or the actual constellation in the sky was constant. Well, it is. It's the North Pole of the Sun, and it only varies about half a degree over 180,000 years.
And that's the only one, isn't it?
It's the only one because the Earth's pole moves all the time. So in the serpent, giving serpent knowledge, which is serpent knowledge is about time. The whole idea behind the serpent giving to Eve the apple of the fruit, if you like, not an apple, but the fruit of the tree of knowledge and good and evil, is a relevance to time itself. So we're saying it is the Draconis constellation that gave to Eve the ability to plan ahead with agriculture or with hunter-gathering. Which produces a fruit.
That makes so much sense.
A fruit of the tree of knowledge of time. Good and evil is time.
They suddenly knew their time, didn't they?
Yes, and of course they explained in archaic language the idea of good and evil. What they actually meant is order and chaos. So order and chaos, darkness and light are all the symbols that we use for good and evil. So consequently it is the fruit of the tree of knowledge of order and chaos, or in other words, the understanding of time. And it's time that gave us. That's why this is another sacred symbol that's used in the temple.
Incredible stuff. How accurate is this thing?
This is, in terms of accuracy, this small handheld one is only accurate to half a degree. Well, that's not very much if you wanted to translate that onto the Earth's surface. Well, what it means is you could only find your location on the Earth to within 30 miles at the equator.
Okay.
However, I went back to the Egyptian pyramids and found that there was an instrument there which was known as the Dixon relics.
Right.
And it was found in 1872 by a man called Wayman Dixon, sent in a cigar box to the Piazzi Smythe, who was the Astronomer Royal of Scotland, and lingered there until the late 1990s, where it was recovered, and parts of it now lie in the British Museum. What it was a plumb bob. Now, a plumb bob, of course, always points to the centre of the earth, and as you know, the Egyptians were very into plumb bobs for balance and truth and so forth, and weighing of goods.
There's a sacred relation in it.
And there's a sacred relation, and of course it's in the weighing of the heart ceremony. So the plumb bob tells you whether or not your heart is heavier than a feather. If it's heavier than a feather, you're going to be reconstituted on the earth. If your heart is lighter than the feather of mat, of truth, honesty and justice, then of course you can find your way to heaven. So in the north shaft of the Queen's Chamber, where the soul shaft, as Dr. Hazahi Awas has called it for many years, was these parts of this instrument which fell out in 1872, which nobody knew they were. So what I did as part of the patent and part of the experiment is I reconstructed them. And today I've got an example of one of those. But before I tell you about that, what I wanted to say is one of the items that came out apart from the plumb bob was the Aries hook, which they thought was part of the opening of the mouth ceremony. But in fact, the Aries hook is made of bronze because it's reflective. And it's perfect for viewing the stars. And so what they would have done with an observer at night, so as not to obscure their eyes, would have lit a dim light or torch in the background and been able to hold this against the stars and bronze and pinpoint the star perfectly.
It reminds me of Moses raising the brazen serpent.
Yes, absolutely.
To guide his people.
Well, the whole idea to raise the cross of the brazen serpent in the desert was for those people who were poisoned, was that would cure the poison. So that's true of most things. Serpent poison cures serpent poisoning.
And of course, it works on every level.
The problem is, yes, it works on every level. And of course, if you've been misled or lied to and so forth from generation to generation, then in effect you're poisoned, and that can affect all of society. In case of the blind following the blind, then they all run off the precipice, don't they?
So it's time now for some truth. So
well, I think it's time for some truth.
You found this as part of the Dixon relics, and what did it tell you?
Well, what it told me from the Dixon relics is that in the construction of the Great Pyramid, which includes the numbers of the moon and the sun and so forth, is that an instrument was required that was more accurate than the Celtic cross, which I just showed you. And the instrument, when I constructed it, was accurate to 3 arc minutes. And that means at the level of where we are now in the Northern Hemisphere, you could find your position to within 1.5 miles on the Earth's surface, which is within view of the horizon.
That's incredible accuracy for a period.
Incredible accuracy.
So
and so, of course,
well,
interestingly, it's 3 arc, I'll come to that very briefly, but it's 3 arc minutes out, which is exactly what the pyramids are. The pyramid complex at Giza, according to Cambridge University, is only 3 arc minutes out, which is exactly the accuracy of this instrument, which I made to scale. May I show you this?
But that's incredible backing for...
Oh, tremendous support for the instrument. This is a real working instrument.
So we've got something here which looks very much like the standard Christian Latin cross, but tilted.
Yes, and what you have is a plumb line, so that the scale, which is across the middle, is bisected by the plumb line. So if the cross is angled to measure any angle in the star, then the plumb line will accordingly move and read it off. And this is accurate to 3 arc minutes.
Notice that the lines actually veer outwards.
Yes, they do, because the clever part about what the Egyptians did is they took a wheel or a circle of 360 degrees and splayed it. So it was like 1/4 of a circle was used, which gave huge accuracy. So to get a circle that would allow this kind of measurement, it would be something like 10 feet in diameter. So this was a great technological step forward for the Egyptians, and that's what allowed them to be able to tell the time to within seconds, and also to be able to build these pyramids to a 52 degrees angle.
The Dixon relic then, where are we saying
the Dixon relic would have been fitted to the top of the spar. So in effect what you have is...
holds the line of the plumb.
Perfectly holds the line of the plumb. And so that, of course, is, I've written extensively about in my book with all the references and so forth, so people can find that out for themselves. But one must always remember that the cross we're talking about with the plumb line is called an inclinometer, and that you could not possibly build anything that had an incline on it without an inclinometer.
Right.
There has been no finding of an inclinometer until I reinterpreted the Dixon relics of
So
1872.
not only have you patented the Celtic cross
Yes,
twice,
yes,
you've reinterpreted what the Celtic cross is,
Yes.
did,
Yes.
and even the sacred nature of that. You've
Yes.
now basically explained how they managed to create something so incredibly accurate as the Great Pyramid at Giza
yes.
through very, very similar devices.
Very simple devices, but a tremendous amount of brain power, and also a tree of knowledge from their ancestors all the way down onto how to use astronomical symbols in the sky and to be able to interpret them correctly and measure time. Click, click, click.
Yes, one big question a lot of people will want to know is
Yes.
basically, that's a cross, that's a Christian cross. Sit down here.
Yes.
It looks very much like a Christian cross. Of course, to a great many people around the world, there's a man pinned to it.
Yes, there is. And I guess if you wanted to interpret what happens to humanity, each one of us has to face death. Few of us ever see it because it's only our relatives that see us dying, but they perceive us fixed in time, disappearing back into the past. Well, of course, we know that there's no such thing as past, otherwise energy would be wasted, and nature doesn't do that. However, that's the perception. So the perception of the death of Christ is that he would be fixed and unable to move, neither with his feet on the earth nor his head in heaven, fixed in that moment of his death on the instrument that actually represented timekeeping. It is not a wrist, as in your like a wristwatch or a clock. Previous to the 14th century, then the only instrument that they had that was capable of measuring time was a quadrant or an octant or a wheel cross earlier, which became a religious symbol, apart from the Antikythera mechanism, of course, which really is an anomaly.
Well, I mean, my mind is kind of racing to many other things now. You look at images of, say, for instance, Quetzalcoatl.
Yep.
Or Kukulkan from the Mayan
Also
Aztecs,
pinned to a cross.
who is also pinned to a cross.
Yes.
So there again, and in many other images, Odin, for instance.
Well, it's the promise of rebirth.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it so sacred, because the pinning of Christ to the cross is he rose after 3 days, but so does the sun come back after 3 days standstill on the solstices.
So yet again, this religious
bringing
device
life back
is actually very much related to many things such as fertility, navigation, measurement, construction now as well.
Yes.
So reinterpretation completely of religion as we know it.
Well, the concept is to understand the nature of time so that you live in balance and harmony with nature itself. But also to what they believed and they tried to put across was that you should have no fear of death, since everything around you recycled and everything is cyclical rather than linear, then should you be.
Is there any...
That would be
how
enough.
How would people find out more about this cross? Because there'll be a lot of people out there who'll probably want to get one.
Well, they can go to my website, crichtonmiller.com. They can, of course, watch the Cross of Thoth, and a lot of people don't understand what the connection between the Celtic cross and the Cross of Thoth. Well, Thoth was the Egyptian god of wisdom, of measurement, of astronomy, of writing. And of course, these principles that we've talked about today require not just a knowledge of astronomy, they require the knowledge of writing so as to make almanacs so that you can predict the positions of Venus, and you can predict the position of the moon at any day or night throughout the year, and also work out the cycles of these things. So, for instance, Sin being the moon is also synodic and is also a sine wave.
I mean, one of the things that always, the language interpretation. Now we understand what you're saying. Some of the language interpretations, you point out horizon.
Yes, means Horus as being the god of time, the Egyptian god of time, plus zone. So it really means place of time or time zone. And the time zone is what you can see, where the stars come over the horizon, where the sun rises or sets.
The beauty of this discovery, these discoveries, is that there are so many little pops that go along with it, such as the reinterpretation of horizon and reinterpretation of religion and the pinning of the cross, the serpent, a great many things. How did it make you feel?
I think I was surprised when I initially discovered it. I went and researched everywhere, hence the patents, which we started the conversation with, was to find out if other people knew about it, and there was absolutely nothing about it anywhere, in any research, in any book, or in any university throughout the world.
No university.
And of course, you can't grant a patent unless something works and it's provable and does what it claims to do, but also hasn't been done before. So it must have been quite a dilemma for the Patents Office, because in the patent I mentioned that this was probably used by ancient people. But they still granted it.
Just granted
I guess if they hadn't have granted it, they would have said, well, we've got issues with what the meaning of the cross is within the church on a gravestone.
You kind of have official backing for even the meaning.
Yes, I do. Just by the granting of the patents, which are really the toughest review you can possibly have, because they're
so
commercial.
a lot of people apply for them, but they don't always necessarily get them, do they?
That's correct, because they say it's obvious or somebody else has invented it before, but in this case they chose to say that it hadn't been invented before, which kind of a win-win situation for me either way. Well, yes. So really what we're talking about is a wheel. Everything in nature is a wheel, and then we learned how to measure moment by moment the wheel of the heavens and the wheel of the face of the earth, and measure time and try to predict it. Well, we try to predict it when we plant our seeds in the ground.
Absolutely,
for
we need to, don't we?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. I mean, what you've done basically is shown an upright cross with the circle, but now, you know, the mind wanders into things like Stonehenge and Avebury and a great many things. You know, what
Stonehenge couldn't have been created without a knowledge of the stars. And of course Stonehenge then measures the movements of the moon and the stars and the sun. And I guess what you could say is that the cross is like a wristwatch version of Stonehenge.
Yeah, I mean, that's the amazing thing.
It's quite a step forward.
You've got the watch on your hand,
yes,
and it is basically Stonehenge on your wrist.
It is in fact Stonehenge on your wrist, and a lot of
it's quite heavy.
The SAS and military people are taught how to navigate using a watch, because they look on it. Yeah, you were. And of course, what they look at us where the big hand is the North Pole of the Earth, and therefore the hand points at the sun. And of course, one of our earliest clocks in Wells Cathedral is 24-hour clock, so it actually does point at the sun.
When we were taught, you know, to read the time from location basically from the watch. It was never ever taught anything like that. Crichton, thank you very much. After the break, we're going to get into some more of the sacred nature of this, with some paganism and Wiccanism. Welcome back to Gardener's World. Well, we've had a fascinating couple of segments so far with Crichton, but what I want to do now is I want to talk to another gentleman and get his insight into this from a different aspect. If the Celtic cross, and the cross indeed is not necessarily a Christian device, symbol, whatever, or that they took it on from before that time, my next guest will be able to give us some insight into what came before. His name is Steve Mitchell. He is the author of a new film called Dragons and Rings. He is the leading light of a band called Soul Path, who also wrote some wonderful music for Crichton's film, The Cross of Thoth. So I'm very pleased to welcome Steve Mitchell, my good friend. Thank you very much for coming along.
That's all right.
I wanted to get your input into this because you are an expert on the pagan and even the Wiccan side of these things. How do you see this incredible discovery of Crichton's?
Well, I think the first thing to establish really is what people regard as pagan, what people regard as Wiccan. We have a conception nowadays of it which is totally divorced, totally devoid from where it originally started. Pagan essentially means man of the land. It's all about living with the land. But we have this kind of perception that's really based on something that's come from the 50s, that's come via kind of Masonic thought, that's come via kind of Rosicrucian thought, various kind of stuff that's been presented as this is Wicca, you know. And one of the things that, and I'm going to kind of reflect into here because it's something that occurred to me while I was listening into your interview, with respect to the circle. Pagans, Wiccans, people who work magic, druids, whatever, tend to work within a circle. And they see this circle is seen as something that's protective, something that keeps away kind of evil forces or whatever. And my one observation to people is, well, if you're living in this amazing kind of world, why do you need to protect yourself? What do you need to protect yourself against? What are you creating? Now, I'll put a kind of case in point here. I've kind of been to various places, and I've seen people cast circle, for want of a better word, and everyone gets into circle and does stuff, and then they say, oh well, we can't have the children in because it wouldn't be right to have children involved in this, so they put them outside
in the danger zone.
Well, yeah, you've created this, you know, danger zone. But what's really interesting is the circle becomes a sacred space. And here's the sacredness. And here I think is where some of the original knowledge lies, because the circle represents time. It represents that kind of fixed versus chaos. It represents, as you said, good and bad, which is why it's kind of been regarded as that. What, if you like, modern day Wiccanism, paganism has picked up about that is this kind of element essentially from the 16th century, essentially from sort of Goetia, from all these kind of grimoires, you know, people like Dee, where they'd be thinking, right, let's cast out the demons, let's approach our darker sides.
There's a famous image of being stood in the circle in the graveyard.
Absolutely, with a demon or whatever in the triangle over there. That's great, but you know, it doesn't apply to modern day. And the other thing as well is, I guess, and this is where I think, you know, what I want to hear from you from, is the aspect of really fertility. Because if we go way, 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 way back, and you're talking about hunter-gatherers, and then you're talking about people who essentially settled the land, people who kind of say, right, this is where we're living. The idea of being able to navigate is very important, but also at that point the idea of being able to know where you are in relation to the seasons, in relation to the stars, the moon and the sun, which govern, like you say, fertility, govern the crops, govern the animals, and our own fertility as well, is, you know, that's really kind of brings in a different kind of element of why, if you like, these sacred spaces, these original spaces. And again, carrying on into the Christian phase, if you look at the kind of structure of a church, it maintains the same structure, doesn't it?
Yeah? Yes, it does.
Absolutely. And you also mentioned about Eve, and you mentioned about the serpent of wisdom, the serpent of time, giving her the apple, at which point she's also given the knowledge of fertility, the knowledge of cycles, the knowledge of why procreation is important to be done at particular times of the year as opposed to any time you like.
Such as May, for instance, with the May pole.
Absolutely.
I mean, you know, to pagans, that's a time of where they reset the calendar.
The human gestation period is 9 months, so it means that the child is born in January. And therefore, by the time March comes around, which would be a planting time for those people who are agriculturally based, then the child is strong enough to be able to be strapped to mum's back while she either goes out and plants the paddy fields or plants the wheat fields.
So this is a very, very important period then, because May is not only a point of resetting the calendar, it's a point that many of the vicars and pastors of the past reported. Our old pagan friends and even Christian friends ran off into the woods and did the thing. Did
anything goes. Anything goes at that time.
And what essentially have you got? You've got a cross on the floor with your North Star, your polar star pointing up, and people weaving time around it, representing time. And it comes back to, comes back to what you were saying with respect to animals. Why have we called the animals in the solar system particular animals? Because it makes a good story. And a good story is something you remember.
You have to pass it from generation to generation. The concept behind placing a sacred circle would probably be to do with keeping chaos on the outside, since we need to live we need to create and live in a state of order so as to survive. So, for instance, the Egyptians said that the Lord of Chaos was an anteater. How very apt. If you were an ant, you wouldn't want it breaking down the walls of your society. And, of course, anything that was seen to be chaotic or evil or destructive, even like modern kids kicking hell out of bus shelters, would be seen to be destroying your society.
So the chaos would be a hoodie these days?
The chaos could well be a hoodie. But
which actually relates back to the May,
he's only
May
looking
Games, because this is the period when Robin Hood
absolutely
was made merry, and
Robin
plays were
it's Robin Goodfellow.
The Robin Goodfellow
of
which you can actually trace back,
Puck,
strangely, through similar people to the Celtic Church.
Yes, absolutely.
And back into paganism. So all these things relate entirely, don't they?
They do, absolutely. And as well, because obviously as a musician, for me, music is about time. Music is about tempo, like you say. It's sacred in itself, it's secular.
Measurement of time.
It is. And it's also a measurement of time in order to pass that measurement, pass that knowledge on to someone else in terms of a tune, a song, a dance around a maypole, which is particular patterns, particular figures.
And distance measurement.
And distance measurement.
Because quite interesting, I believe, is it if you have a plumb line on a piece of string that's 15 inches long, it vibrates at 1 beat to the second.
Absolutely, and that gets even crazier, doesn't it, once we're bringing frequency and sound into it. Because all of a sudden this instrument isn't just an instrument of measurement, it's an instrument of event. It's
well, the great collegiate churches are an example of that. And that was a use of geometry, using instruments like these to create perfect bouncing systems for sound waves so as to enhance the sound of the human voice and what instruments they had in the past. But that also goes back to Maes Howe and some of the great also Irish barrows, where they found out that the use of sound applies in those. So it's all about time measurement or tempo.
Getting back to the pagan point of view, I mean, you've basically ruled out that modern paganism has really got much basis in ancient times, pre-Christian times.
I think what's happened, I think what's happened along the way is people have become confused. They've accepted doctrine, they've accepted thought, they've accepted, for example, you know, a lot of Wicca, for example, is based around the works of Gerald Gardner. Who was a guy in the 50s, who basically a Mason. You know, and if you actually look, if you look at all the rites, if you look at all these kind of writings, all these passages, all these quotes, they're fresh out of.
I mean, I must say, you know,
literature.
from a historian's point of view, one has to ask, how do these modern pagans know that this particular ritual was done?
Absolutely.
In pre-Christian times, because, you know, Pliny doesn't tell us about these things, for instance. He may go on a little bit about the Druids, tell us various things that they did. Were also very important to this.
The central, absolutely, because the centre of the Masonic rites, or the Scottish Rite Masons, is still Roslin Chapel. And Roslin Chapel is built at the foot of the Pentland Hills. And that indicates the pentagram. And the pentagram, of course, comes from the moon's number, because the Earth wobbles at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. So, and that's quite important, because 360 degrees divided by 72 is 5. And you, thereby making a circle, you draw a pentagram. But you can also draw a hexagram.
Like it makes a shape, the moon kind of makes a pentagram shape.
Yes, well, what happens is the moon, and this was measured in ancient times. Absolutely, and Venus was one of the items that used. Even the Mayans studied Venus. That was their god of war, not their god of love, because they timed the dry season. They timed the dry season to go to war, and that was when Venus was heliacal.
Well, look at Artemis, huntress.
Absolutely. And so it's all about timekeeping. That's why I wrote my book called The Golden Thread of Time, because this is a tiny golden thread that passes through all the ages, which is unbreakable, if you like, and brings time to our minds again.
Now, one of the things that I find interesting about all this, what you've discovered and the things that you're pointing out about life and death, these are very terrifying things for people. Over time, man's had to find some way of overcoming this. Of course, we have the Gnostics, who gave us lots of very, very wise texts, which is what I write about.
Yeah.
You look at this from a kind of frequency aspect almost, because of your music.
Yeah.
And Crichton looks at it from the sacred position of the cross point, and the related things that are there. So,
well, may I?
Absolutely.
The cross is only an instrument for interpretation of time, as a guitar would be for the interpretation of time in music language. So the cross interprets astrological time, which is really interesting because Rosslyn Chapel, which we talked about later, which the Knights Templar are associated with, shows every aspect of nature in terms of all its plants and so forth, growing in its angles. Yeah. But go back to the Great Pyramids. Now, the Great Pyramids, whether you believe they were a tomb or not, actually the purest example of nature, because they incorporate in 360 degrees, 72 degrees, 720 is a number. The speed of the sun is 900 arc minutes an hour. The speed of the moon is 720 arc minutes an hour. Take one from the other is 180. That's in each face of the pyramid. It even has on the pyramids 25,920 when you multiply them all by each other. Where did our multiplication sign
And that is the processional
the
thing.
mathematics of nature by which we live. The moon, which governs menstruation in women, tides and so forth. Those numbers are in there, which is why Thoth is mentioned, because Thoth was the god of the moon as well and of wisdom.
Just incredible.
That's something else you kind of pointed out in there, and again, bringing it back, shall we say, into the pagan kind of fold, is within there you mentioned the Knights Templar. And again, you find in that whole kind of belief structure, and particularly in the Catholic belief, that they fell out with the Pope, they fell out with Christian Church over the issue of procreation. Over the issue of not what everyone kind of assumes, the kind of homosexual element of it, but actually it was over the fact that the Catholic belief was that both abortion and birth control were necessary. And we come back way into our kind of fertility cycle.
I will appreciate that, but I have to say to you that there has a commercial aspect. There's no difference between the commerce of today than there was of then. And it had to do with the Roman Catholic Church, which was in France at the time, combining with the king to go against the Knights Templar who owed money. But what did they want from a Knights Templar? Well, they may well have said that it was heresy and so forth they were torturing them for. Actually, what they were torturing out of them was knowledge of timekeeping and how to navigate the world, because it wasn't very long after the end of the Knights Templar that we suddenly spread across and conquered Americas, the Americas.
Well, certainly what Steve was saying is that it was a tool used by them.
Yes, it was a tool,
doubt,
but commercial interests drive things far greater than anything
spiritual. The
spiritual.
commercial thing would not be something that you would openly want to state. So they used
Certainly they wouldn't
their
have stated
boogers and, you know, the
Absolutely.
So it was a tool to beat them with.
It was a tool to beat them with and to justify their actions, but what they were actually after was the gold and knowledge. Was the Knights Templar, nobody knows where their wealth came from, but there's a very good chance they were trading with South America for 300 years before Columbus.
And what happens following the downfall of the Knights Templars, apart from the dispersal of the ships, etc., is that you know, in the next few hundred years we start to find places.
Absolutely, and of course the Knights Templar knew where they were already, and that was taken from them because the Knights Templar then fled to Scotland and Portugal.
To me, what you've discovered is a key to the past. Just like in the 14th, 15th, 16th centuries, they put keys on maps for us to, you know, for people who didn't have the eyes to see, they would not have been able to recognise you know,
Well,
how to get from one place.
They had to be protective of their trades. Why do we think in medieval maps or charts it says in the Atlantic Ocean, here be dragons? That's to keep people away from the trade routes. Why would you give away your knowledge? And they didn't give away the knowledge, they kept it. This was only for initiates, it was only for royalty, it was only for priests.
Well, the whole idea of this show has been to release some of this information, and we shall go on to do so. And I'm really thankful of you coming along, both of you, both Crichton Miller and Steve Mitchell, my guests tonight on Gardener's World. Thank you very much, and I do hope to see you again in the future on Edge Media TV.
Though normally the Earth's magnetic field shields us from the worst impacts, scientists have observed that our magnetic field in recent years is weaker than usual. Perhaps it is merely the outcome of the continuing battering it has sustained from the solar flares. Whatever the answer may be, the fact is that if the magnetic field is extremely low and the solar flares extremely violent, as they are expected to be in 2012, a climate catastrophe is inevitable.
Is it the end of the world? The end of the world? Is it the dawning of a new age? Is it going to be a cataclysm? Is it going to be a beautiful vision from the stars? Is it something which we need to do?
There would be a chalice of fire that would appear over the sea and a huge storm that would extinguish the sun for maybe 3 days.
2012 is meant to be a milestone, the end of an age. Within this context, we are at a point where we can shift from the descending phase of the cycle to the ascending phase. At the start of a new age, the sixth sun, the Mayan creation mythology states that a new vision quest is required. Let's look at the big picture, for the world has become one global village and we all need to adapt and learn to live with this new reality. We have come a tremendously long way, but if we ever want to reach the center of our galaxy and learn about the cradle of life, we have an even longer voyage ahead of us.
From the infamous Illuminati to the modern Freemasons, the world is fascinated with secret societies. Tales of child sacrifice, world domination, and dark dealings with extraterrestrials are all paraded before us as truth. The New World Order, famously penned by the science fiction writer H.G. Wells, has become a reality in the minds of millions, and today its leaders are even believed by some to be reptilian shapeshifters. The massive amounts of information set before us now on the World Wide Web
may be spreading further and faster than ever before, but the belief in a powerful and secret ruling elite is nothing new. In fact, secret societies have been around almost as long as man. The eventual knowledge of these groups would be deemed sacred and protected. Whether it was practical methods of survival, navigation, measurement, or psychological and spiritual inner wisdom, it would become the ground plan for future secret societies, and as populations grew, it would bestow great power and danger upon them. It all began in the knowledge of the heavens and the mind of man. It all revolved around strength, and so our question has to be today: what is the true purpose of the modern elite within the Brotherhood? Is it truly one of charitable works? Yes. Does it still maintain ideas about reaching the divine in balance and wisdom? Yes. Is it an organisation seeking influence and power? Yes. Has it been involved with revolution and scandal? Yes. This is the story of the groups who have guarded this sacred knowledge for centuries. In our modern times, fantasy is commonplace and a means of escape for many. But in times past, people had to rely on religious fables and oral tales. But then a group of writers started to bring us new worlds and set our imaginations on fire. One of these was Lewis Carroll. Strange and peculiar lands, mind-bending conundrums, weird creatures. Was this all nonsense, or is there a real and profound enigma locked away in the tales of Alice? It's time to unlock the door and peer into a realm of fantasy that holds a message for us all. Was Lewis Carroll initiated into the ancient mysteries? What were his connections to secret societies? Why were his diaries destroyed? What did he hide in the pages of his Alice books? There is a whole world of incredible truth locked away in the works of Lewis Carroll. There is also a good reason that Alice is Greek for truth. All the real ancient religions of the globe are all based on serpent worship. The snake, the serpent and the dragon became the devil, became Satan. So the skull would rest on this very holy thing and you would lift up and drink. It answers all the questions. Once your eyes are open to serpent worship, you'll find it everywhere. But it's time that we actually had our real history back. Serpent worship is still alive today, but it's in our new religions, who simply replaced the actual picture of a snake with a man.
Our world, all the other worlds, all the planets, all universes, parallel universes, whatever there may be, every blade of grass, every animal is interconnected in some way, shape or form.
Some say the end of mankind is near. Some say that economic and financial turmoil is part of the process, along with global warming, warfare, and the spread of mass psychosis.
When there's no place you feel at home, and you think you'll be better off alone.
Children are prescribed drugs to keep them calm. The climate is changing all around us, while celebrities become our gods and materialism the new mantra.
We live in an era where we're obsessed by celebrity. We live in an era where everyone wants a route out of their ordinary lives, and people want a quick fix these days. I mean, the idea of learning a trade from your father or doing a 5-year apprenticeship's gone out of the window. People now want to go on Big Brother and become a celebrity overnight. People want to be a wag.
Is there a reason behind this modern-day madness? Are our material lives making us truly content?
If I want to know what the truth is, I have to live truthfully. And as long as I live as truthful to myself and to others, then I'm like in the vibration of truth. Therefore, it will resonate with me or not.
But there is a ratio to it all, a rhyme and reason behind everything that we do and everything that affects us.
Did this really happen by accident? this whole universe and us living on this planet in this fragile atmosphere, in this one place in the universe. It is beyond thought, it is beyond words, but there is a purpose to it.
Once people start connecting with what they think and what they believe, once they start taking the more innocent point of view that their ancestors took, I think there is still hope for the survival of the human race, because if they don't, we will poison ourselves off this planet eventually, I think.
Like mad magicians seeking to rule the world, men of renown have fleetingly seen the epic nature of the ancient code in its alluring essence, but all too often they fall into an abyss of their own making, choosing the wrong side of the code. But today we too have missed the point in our everyday complacency. We choose to exist in a waking sleep. We spend time naming things and separating them, classifying endless parts and pieces without remembering the whole, the one from which all things come. It needs no hatred nor warfare. It needs no drugs. It simply is. For you are the key to the code.
Once you've found that point of connection in yourself, where you are part of nature, part of the world around you, and it is part of you, then no secret, no quantum physics, quantum spirituality can get anywhere near that point of unique connection, because you've found yourself and you've found your own God within yourself.